They threw him out with almost nothing. One duffel bag, one dog, and a town that laughed while the mountain watched. Owen Mercer stood at the edge of Black Hollow, Montana, with 93 pounds of white German Shepherd pressed against his leg, and the silence of a man who had already lost everything once. The ridge held a broken steel hut the county forgot 30 years ago. Bent walls, rusted frame, half buried in snow. The town called it a coffin. They called him worse. But Owen saw a rock-backed placement. He saw anchor points. He saw a shell that could hold. Now 43 days later, a historic blizzard traps the entire town inside that same hut. The main entrance disappears under snow. One child is missing outside. And Koda, that white shepherd with pale amber eyes, has been clawing at the rear wall like he knows something is there. Something that will decide who lives and who does not. Black Hollow, Montana sits in a valley between two granite peaks where a creek freezes solid by November, and the people there have learned to measure time by the color of the sky before a storm. It is not a hard place. There is genuine beauty, the kind that makes photographers stop on the highway. But there is also a dangerous confidence that grows in people who have survived enough winters to believe they understand the mountain. Owen Mercer arrived in late October, stepping off the shuttle bus with his duffel in one hand and Koda's lead in the other. He was 41, ash-brown hair cut short, steel-gray eyes that processed everything with quiet attention. 5'10", solid build, moving with the precision of someone who had learned that wasted energy could be fatal. A rope-burn scar circled his right wrist, pale and smooth, part of him now. He wore a dark green canvas jacket, heavy work pants, boots resoled twice. He carried the stillness of a man who had stopped trying to impress anyone. 14 years, a Navy SEAL. Cold weather extraction specialist. The kind who went where the environment was as dangerous as any enemy. He left 11 months ago with a medical discharge, shoulder injury, technically true. The full account, a mountain in a country he could not name, a teammate named Danny Voss, a rope that held 3 minutes 47 seconds before the ice anchor failed. Owen held Danny's wrist while the wind tried to take them both, held it until the rope burned through glove and skin, and then Danny was gone. He did the rehabilitation. He did the counseling. When it finished, he stood in a Denver parking lot and knew he could not live around noise or pity. He needed a place that would push back, that would not care about rank or record, that would wait to see what he was made of. Koda had been with him 5 years. 93 pounds of white German Shepherd, coat so dense it seemed to generate its own light. Pale amber gold eyes, the color of late sun through winter haze, holding intelligent attention that processed continuously without showing effort. Trained for avalanche search and rescue, specialized in enclosed space detection. The bond between them was functional. Two creatures tested together who learned the other would not fail when failure meant death. Koda knew Owen's moods before Owen did. He understood without words. The county worker bunkhouse was temporary, 1980s structure for forestry crews, a bed and hot plate. Owen stayed 6 days before walking the ridge and finding the steel hut. 300 feet above town, accessible by an unmaintained track, it was what the town believed: broken, abandoned, useless. Bent walls from avalanche impact, rusted frame, collapsed roof, rear section buried under snow and rockfall. Door on one hinge, interior filled with debris. Owen stood 20 minutes while Koda ranged the perimeter. The wind carried high-altitude snow and granite, and Owen felt recognition, a problem solvable through work. The hut sat against a north rock face, natural protection. Bedrock foundation. Heavy-gauge steel panels that could be straightened. He saw an emergency shelter. He saw a place that could hold life when the mountain tested the town's confidence. He asked questions. About winter safety infrastructure. About abandoned structures for emergency use. About storm shelter capacity. There was none on the ridge. The emergency plan assumed people would drive to the valley floor, ignoring what Owen knew about mountain weather. Mason Vale Hurd. 53, county facilities supervisor 11 years, thin-faced with precise gestures, the confidence of administrative positions. He found solutions that were administratively tidy, not actually effective. He responded to Owen's questions with hostility, hearing criticism in any request for information. On day 8, Mason came with 2 workers and revoked Owen's placement. No specific violation, county discretion. He looked at Owen's bag, at Koda alert beside the bed, and said, "You're a problem. Problems get moved along." Owen packed in silence. They walked out into October afternoon, everything he owned in one bag and one dog, the town watching with small place curiosity. Owen went up to the ridge, to the broken steel hut, stood before it in the low October light, and decided. He would make it hold. He would use his hands and his discharge savings, not much, but enough if he worked alone and careful. He began next morning. The work brutal at high altitude, thin air making exertion cost more, cold finding every gap. He cleared debris, sorted salvage. Koda stayed with him, ranging mornings, settling afternoons. The dog spent time at the rear wall, nose to gaps between steel and stone, scratching snow with persistence Owen dismissed as curiosity. Pete Garland came up first. 61, logger 40 years, he watched Owen straighten a bent panel with a come-along. "You're serious?" "Not a question." "It'll hold," Owen said. Pete nodded, came back with salvaged insulation, helped install it, asking nothing. Nadia Rowan came 3 weeks later. 34, clinic nurse, dark hair pulled back, green eyes that had seen enough difficulty. She brought coffee, found Owen working by lantern, looked at straightened walls and reinforced roof. "What are you building?" Genuine curiosity. Owen assessed if she deserved answer. "For whatever comes." She poured coffee, handed him a cup, sat on the unfinished bunk. They didn't speak until she left. But something established. The mockery continued. Roy Decker, hardware store owner, called it a death trap at the diner. Others, coffin, scrap box, monument to inability. Mason Vale drove past the turnoff, calling it code violation he was too busy to address. Owen continued. He had been mocked before by people who later needed his skills. He reinforced steel with angle iron. Patched roof with barn salvage. Built bunks with storage. Installed a rebuilt wood stove. Carved drainage channels. Worked in silence with Koda, and the hut became what he saw. Koda never stopped watching the rear wall. Each evening, pressing nose to steel, scratching snow. On day 28, Owen set down tools and cleared where Koda scratched. Beneath, a gap between rear wall and granite, filled with rockfall and ice, revealing a passage. Low, narrow, original construction. A forgotten maintenance tunnel. He cleared enough to see it was sound, stabilized the entrance. Thought it useful for ventilation or exit. Did not yet know how important. Storm warnings came late November. Subtle signs experienced people read, the silence before systems, animal behavior, barometer dropping, dawn sky color. Koda felt it first, more alert, longer periods at the north window, amber eyes fixed on the peak. Owen watched and prepared. He tried to warn them. Told Mayor Linda Hess what he saw in weather patterns, what signs indicated. She listened carefully, said she would consult the emergency coordinator. The coordinator was Mason Vale. Owen knew the result. He spoke to Pete, who believed. To Nadia, who believed. But Roy Decker mocked him louder as the storm made people nervous. Mason dismissed him publicly, alarmist, outsider. The storm arrived first Thursday December, suddenly, temperature dropping 20 degrees in 6 hours, wind off peaks making steel walls sing, snow horizontal, finding every gap. Power failed mid-afternoon, roads impassable by evening, visibility nothing. Mayor Hess made the call at 7. The designated shelter compromised, roof leak, heat failed, road buried. She remembered Owen's words, the ridge, the mocked project. Ordered move uphill. They came at 9, first wave struggling up the track, guided by Owen's lantern beacon. He directed them inside, assigning places, managing the stove, distributing supplies. Koda moved through with alertness, monitoring. More came, families, elderly, Pete guiding last groups. Roy Decker came, mockery silenced. Mason Vale came, workers refusing to leave him, entering uncomfortable to accept help from someone he wronged. By 11, 43 people inside space for 20, air thick with heat and fear and wet will smell, but alive, sheltered, steel walls holding. Then Nadia came to Owen, face destroyed. She counted children, could not find Tommy. 7 years old, her son, holding her hand on the climb, lost in confusion. Searched 3 times, called until voice raw, he was not there. Not in the hut. Owen opened the door against wind, flashlight down the track, white oblivion. Called Tommy's name, heard only wind. Closed the door, looked at Nadia, saw the horror of a parent who knows their child is outside in killing conditions. The main entrance compromised, snow drifting, 43 people breathing affecting air quality. He felt it, slight heaviness, elevated carbon dioxide. 2 dangers, missing child outside, trapped people inside. Koda moved to the rear wall, pressing steel where the tunnel entrance hid, scratching with persistence from when he found the passage, but now with urgency, understanding something wrong. Owen went to him, dropped to knees, hand on thick white fur. Dog turned, pale amber eyes holding certainty. Owen understood. The tunnel. If Tommy wandered, confused in storm, he might be near exterior vent. And the tunnel, if clear, could provide ventilation, become emergency exit. Owen cleared the panel with focused speed, Koda waiting with patient urgency. Storm raged, steel groaned, 43 people held breath, and somewhere in white darkness a child missing, the only path through a forgotten tunnel a white German Shepherd discovered and would not stop showing. Koda did not move from the tunnel entrance. His pale amber eyes held Owen's gaze for 3 seconds, long enough for certainty to pass between them. Then he turned and pushed into the narrow passage, his white coat disappearing into the darkness beyond the panel. Owen followed immediately, the beam of his flashlight cutting through dust and cold air that moved differently here, carrying the smell of stone and old timber and something else, something that made his chest tighten with recognition. The tunnel was tight, forcing him to crouch, his shoulders brushing the timber shoring on both sides, his boots finding purchase on stone worn smooth by decades of forgotten use. Behind him, he heard Pete Garland's voice calling out, but he did not stop to answer. Koda was moving ahead with purpose, and Owen had learned years ago that when the dog moved like this, the only correct response was to keep up. The passage ran 15 feet before angling downward, following the natural slope of the ridge, and Owen felt the temperature drop as they descended, the air becoming denser, carrying more weight. His flashlight caught Koda's tail ahead, the white fur luminous in the beam, and then the dog stopped at a junction where the main tunnel split, one branch continuing down toward the foundation drainage, the other turning toward what Owen calculated must be the exterior vent on the downslope side. Koda did not hesitate. He took the exterior branch, moving faster now, claws finding traction on stone, and Owen followed, feeling the walls close in slightly, the timber shoring more weathered here, closer to the surface. The wind found them then, not the full force of the storm but its voice, moaning through gaps in the structure, and beneath it, threaded through it, Owen heard something that made him stop and listen. A sound. Small. Human. Crying. Koda heard it too. The dog surged forward, no longer patient, no longer methodical, moving with the urgency that Owen had seen only twice before. In a collapsed building in a country he could not name, and in a crevasse where a teammate had waited for rescue that arrived 3 minutes too late. Owen matched him, crawling now where the tunnel height dropped, his flashlight beam bouncing off stone and steel, and then they reached the exterior vent, a grated opening partially buried in snow, and beyond it, visible through the bars, a small shape in a red jacket curled against the steel housing. Tommy. 7 years old, conscious, weeping, his small hands pressed against the grate as if he could push through it, his face pale with cold and terror, but alive. Alive. Owen reached the grate and shone his light through, and Tommy's eyes found him, and the sound the child made was not words but the raw expression of relief that comes when the thing you have been praying for arrives. Owen assessed in seconds, the grate was secured with rusted bolts, the snow outside packed around the housing, the child within reach if he could get through. He pulled the bolt cutters from his belt, the same tool he had used to cut the padlock on the kennel 3 stories ago in another life, and he worked the frozen bolts, feeling the metal resist and then give, feeling Koda pressed against his leg, the dog's body heat and presence keeping him anchored in the moment. The grate came free. Owen reached through and took Tommy's arm, gentle but firm, the grip that had held Danny Voss for 3 minutes and 47 seconds, and he pulled the child through the opening and into the tunnel, and Koda was there immediately, pressing against the small body, providing warmth, providing contact, providing the comfort that only a dog can provide in that specific way. Tommy was hypothermic. Owen knew the signs: slurred speech, clumsy movements, the particular lethargy that came when the body began shutting down peripheral systems to protect the core. But he was conscious and he was responsive, and that meant there was time. Owen stripped off his own outer jacket and wrapped it around the child, then lifted him, holding him against his chest with one arm while the other held the flashlight, and he turned back toward the main tunnel, toward the hut, toward the 43 people waiting. Koda led, moving with the careful speed of a dog who understood that the return journey carried precious cargo, and Owen followed, bent nearly double in the narrow passage, feeling Tommy's small heart beating against his own, feeling the child's breath warm against his neck, feeling something shift in his chest that he had not felt since before Danny died, the sensation of having arrived in time. They emerged into the hut through the rear panel, and the first person Owen saw was Nadia, her face transformed by hope and fear simultaneously, and she took Tommy from his arms with the particular gentleness of a mother who has imagined this moment 1,000 times in the last hour and still cannot believe it is real. The child was crying now, real crying, the release of tension that meant he was safe enough to feel everything he had been holding back, and Nadia held him and looked at Owen with eyes that contained more than gratitude, that contained the recognition of debt that can never be fully repaid, and Owen nodded once and turned away because the moment was hers and he had other work to do. The tunnel had provided more than rescue. It had provided ventilation. The air in the hut was already clearer, the pressure of too many breathing bodies in too small a space relieved by the opening Owen had created, and people were looking at him differently now, looking at the rear wall and the panel that stood open and understanding that what they had mocked had become their salvation. But Owen did not stop for their recognition. He moved through the crowd, checking the most vulnerable, adjusting the wood stove, making sure the conditions that had nearly killed Tommy did not find another victim. Koda stayed with him, the dog's presence now accepted by the crowd as something essential, something they had been wrong to dismiss when they dismissed his master. Mason Vale sat in the corner, his expensive winter coat dirted by the climb up the track, his face doing something complicated as he watched Owen work. Owen did not approach him. The confrontation would come, but not now. Not while the storm still raged and the work of survival continued. Pete Garland met his eye across the room and nodded. The same nod he had given on the ridge when Owen said the hut would hold, and that nod meant more than any words of thanks. Nadia had wrapped Tommy in blankets and was feeding him warm liquid from a thermos, and the child was looking around with a particular awareness of someone who has been to the edge and returned, his small hand resting on Koda's white fur where the dog had settled beside him, accepting the touch with the calm patience of a working animal who understood that this was part of the job. The storm continued through the night. The wind did not moderate, the snow did not stop, but the steel walls held, and the wood stove burned, and the tunnel provided the airflow that kept them alive. Owen worked in shifts with Pete and 2 other men, keeping the stove fed, monitoring the conditions, making sure the structure that had been tested and found sufficient was not pushed beyond its limits. He slept for 2 hours in the chair, Koda pressed against his legs, and woke to find that someone, Nadia he later learned, had covered him with a blanket, and that the quality of the air had changed, the storm's voice dropping from a scream to a moan, the first indication that the system was moving past them. Morning came gray and still, the darkness becoming less absolute, the shapes of things reasserting themselves against the lightning sky. Owen opened the main door against snow that had drifted halfway up the frame, and he looked out at a world transformed, white, smooth, silent in the particular way that mountains are silent after they have finished expressing their power. The track down to town was buried, the valley below invisible under uniform snow, but the sky was clearing, and the air was warming slightly, and the emergency that had required immediate response was becoming the aftermath that required different skills. They dug out together, all of them, the 43 people who had been enemies and strangers and indifferent neighbors now bound by what they had survived together. The work was hard, the snow deep and heavy, but there were many hands, and by midday they had cleared a path down to the main road, where county plows were already working their way up from the valley floor. Tommy rode on Pete's shoulders, wrapped in blankets, chattering now with the energy of a child who had survived and was already transforming the experience into story. Nadia walked beside Owen, not speaking, but her presence saying what words could not. Koda ranged ahead, checking the route, his white coat visible against the snow, the pale amber eyes finding Owen's at intervals to confirm that all was well. In the days that followed, the truth emerged. Not through Owen's effort, though he could have made it emerge, but through the documents that were found in the lower compartment of the hut when people went to repair and reinforce what had saved them. Maintenance logs, inspection records, correspondence between county offices, paperwork that Mason Vale had assumed buried with the structure he had allowed to decay. The records showed what Owen had suspected. Vale had lied about repairs, diverted funds, abandoned winter safety infrastructure across multiple ridge facilities, and had targeted Owen specifically because his questions threatened to expose the pattern. It was not personal, exactly. It was administrative, which in some ways was worse, the calculation that some lives were acceptable losses in the maintenance of a career. Vale was suspended, then charged, then removed from office in the quiet way that bureaucratic corruption is removed, without drama but with finality. Owen did not attend the hearings. He was on the ridge, rebuilding, expanding, making the steel hut into what it had promised to be. The town insisted on helping now, providing materials and labor and the respect that had been absent before, and Owen accepted the help without comment, directing the work with the same focused attention he brought to everything. Pete Garland became his partner in the project, the two men working in the comfortable silence of people who understand each other without needing to explain. Nadia brought Tommy up on weekends, and the child would sit with Koda for hours, reading to the dog or simply resting against him, and Owen would watch from the corner of his eye and feel something in his chest that was not quite healed but was healing. The sign went up in March, when the snow had pulled back enough to allow the work of installation. Black Hollow Winter Sanctuary, it read, and beneath that, smaller, built by Owen Mercer. Found by Koda. The town had wanted something grander, something official, but Owen had insisted on these words, and Nadia had understood why, and had helped him convince the council. It was not about credit. It was about truth. The hut had been built by his hands, yes, but it had been found, its potential, its purpose, its hidden passage, by the dog who would not stop scratching at the rear wall. The final image came on the first warm Saturday in April, when the snow was melting and the creek was running again and the mountain had returned to the beauty that made people forget its danger. Owen sat on the step of the sanctuary, Koda lying with his head on Owen's boot, the dog's pale amber eyes half closed in the sunlight. The ridge stretched above them, the peaks still white with snow that would last into summer, and below them the town was visible, small and busy and alive. Owen was still, not because life had stopped hurting, not because he had forgotten Danny Voss or the rope or the 3 minutes and 47 seconds, but because this time he had not failed. This time he had arrived in time. This time the standing, the work, the patience, the refusal to stop, had been worth what it cost. Koda's ear moved, the one with the small notch at the tip that marked an old training injury, and he looked up at Owen with the complete attention that was his gift and his nature. Owen put his hand on the white fur, feeling the warmth, feeling the steady heartbeat, and he did not speak because nothing needed to be said. The mountain was there, the way it had always been, enormous and patient and entirely unchanged by what had happened at its feet. But Owen was changed. The town was changed. And somewhere in that change was the beginning of something that might, eventually, become peace.